This episode of the Linux Action Show is brought to you by the good-looking folks at GoDaddy.com. Use our code Linux and save yourself some cash. And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 19, Episode 3, recorded and released on Sunday, October 30th, from a very early Pacific Northwest. My name is Chris.
And my name is Alan.
Hey there, Alan. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm feeling the morning, because it's getting darker out, and everybody in the chat room's talking about having snow, and all I have is effing rain. That's all I have, Alan. But other than that,
it got down to freezing, and we had a little bit of a frost, but no snow yet.
No snow yet. Well, we have an awesome show, so I think it'll make up for my lack of snow blues. Coming up in today's episode, we're going to review a distribution that takes Arch Linux and makes it crazy easy to use. It's Chakra Linux. I'll work on
Chakra.
Chakra? Yeah.
No, it's just Chakra.
Chakra.
Yeah.
Chakra.
Yeah.
Chakra. Well, what is it? It is a beautiful front end to Arch Linux. It takes care of a lot of the hard, rough spots with Arch, like installing it and getting a fully functional, nice, pretty desktop running. This does it out of the box. We're going to review that for you. We've also got some cool news coming up, but before we get to all of that, we've got a couple of Android and app picks for your Linux boxes.
Yeah.
But first, we've got to say good morning to the good folks over at the GoDaddy.com and the beautiful Danica Patrick Allen at GoDaddy.com is the world's #1 domain name and registrar, and longtime supporters of Jupiter Broadcasting and the Linux Action Show. They are Linux fans, and that's why they advertise on this show, because they're Linux users themselves. GoDaddy has sponsored up to about 20 grand worth of open source projects in the past. And if you're over at GoDaddy, and why wouldn't you be over at GoDaddy if you're buying a domain name or getting some hosting, use our code Linux when you check out. Or if you want to save a little extra money on hosting, you can use the code Linux20. But in the next, let's see, this expires on November.
I noticed. Oh, okay. But I also noticed they have some cloud stuff now, like to compete with Amazon EC2.
Oh, really? I should look into that. I wonder what they offer.
And it also competes with the Rackspace cloud servers, and they're considerably cheaper.
That's getting to be a pretty heated territory. Well, something that GoDaddy's offering until November 15th is money off of their website tonight plan. And I love these because if you want to go into a client and say, hey, I can get you a site running nice and quick, it'll look like this. Here's an example of it. You don't have to invest a ton of time to show them that, because you can use this website tonight system to set that up for you, which is really nice. Gets you in, lets you give a demo to the client, and then gets you the contract so you can go build the site. If you want to try that out and you want to save some money on that, you can get 20% off for 12 months or longer plans if you use the code Linux12 when you're doing the website tonight plan. Of course, that does expire by November 15th, so check that out. And thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring the Linux Action Show. I should mention my Runs Linux, because it's kind of a cool one. And it's something that came out this week. 200 retail stores throughout China will soon be running Linux. Actually, it's a partnership between Canonical and Dell, too, which is really nice. They're working to put up kiosks in stores of Ubuntu stations, like laptops and other Dell hardware running on Ubuntu, and it looks just like any PC store. And there's going to be 200 different retail outlets throughout China. If you're watching the video version right now, I'm showing you a display from Beijing, which is really cool. So
actually, that reminds me of a cool story. There was a restaurant in town here that we went to a couple weeks back, and we noticed that their point-of-sale systems were all Linux, because they had the screensaver up, and it was like a spinning 3D tux.
Awesome.
That's just like, cool. Hey,
I love
honestly,
it. In fact,
it's better than you see some stores with like the Windows XP-based point-of-sale system, and you just laugh at them when it crashes. Well,
and you also get a little worried, because you're like, I don't like that.
You're worried, and you watch it crash, and it's slow, and they complain about it all the time. And then, hey, look, there's this Linux one, and it works great, and it doesn't reboot ever.
Yeah, in fact, if you spot Runs Linux in the wild, send it in to me, Chris at linuxactionshow.com, or you can submit it to the Linux Action Show subreddit. I love it when I get ones from the audience that I can share. So if you see something like Alan saw, send it in. I get a lot of people who've seen them on the airplanes, like on the in-flight entertainment systems, but we've covered a lot of those. So I need some new ones. That's all. All right. Speaking of my Android app pick, let's talk about a little video game that's tongue-in-cheek. It's a take on tower defense, only it's with a sort of fun, humorous spin on it that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's called Guns and Glory World War II. This is based on, there's also one that's more like an old Western one. It's a free app in the Android marketplace. And like I described it as a tower defense, but it's a cheeky tower defense. You're either the U.S. Army or you can be the Nazis and you defend your territory. But this one, you actually move troops around. So it's not quite such static towers as you might be more familiar with. You actually control them and can get supplies if you defend a certain area. So it's tower defense to the next level with this fun kind of humorous sounds and slip smack, whatever you want to call it, humor, where they kind of make fun of themselves and say outrageous things and do outrageous stuff. It's a good app, and it's a free one. Link in the show notes for that guy. I played it on my Galaxy Tab 7, and it worked great. The
Nice.
only downside is the free version. I don't know if there's a paid version. The free version has one of those, like little banner ads at the bottom. Those little, you know what I mean? It's like when you're sitting there getting your fingers all over your screen, touching stuff, and you got that stupid ad there. That kind of can be a little frustrating, but great game overall. I highly recommend it. So it's Guns and Glory World War II Edition. Link in the show notes, and as well as a link to all of the previous app picks we've done on the Linux Action Show.
Yeah.
Slapstick. Yes, thank you, chat room. Chat room is my brain this morning because they know that I'm barely getting through this first segment because it's so early. I do have my cup of coffee though, so
it's not that early. Just wait until another couple weeks when the time zone changes.
Well, I know it's early here. It's early here.
I know.
Oh boy, tell me about it. I'm not ready for it, Alan. I'm not ready for it. All right.
Yeah.
My app pick this week came about because I decided I wanted to feature like some of the best Linux terminals in like a segment for the Linux Action Show. I thought, after I got done looking at them, I thought, well, I've really got 10 minutes worth of material here. So I took what I liked the best out of that segment, and I made an app pick. And then I shelved it because we just had other things to talk about. And then this week, when reviewing Chakra Linux?
Chakra
Linux, they had one of these app picks pre-installed, and I got to play with it. And I decided, you know what, I've got to make this my app pick. And I got one for GNOME users and KDE users this week. First up is the GNOME users. It's called Guake Terminal. Not Quake, Guake with a G, with a gua. And it is, if you remember in Quake 3, you had that little terminal that if you hit the tilde key or whatever it would slide down from the top of the screen when you were playing the first-person shooter. That's this, only for your Linux desktop. So you slap a quick key, and then it just slides down from the very top. Of course, chat room is pointing out that you could also run this on KDE. It's not necessarily a GNOME thing, but I don't do that because I have one that's KDE specific called Yaki or something like that, Yakuake, and this is the same thing, slide down terminal emulator for the KDE desktop. This one has a lot of nice features, supports tabs and things like that. It's empowering I mapped it to, I think, Alt / is what it was. So I could do Alt / and it slides down, type in my thing, Alt / slides back up, and I just go about what I'm doing. And it's kind of a blast. And I think most of these are in the package repos for your local distro, but I do have links in the show notes so you can go get the project name and things
like that. But I like that idea just because, you always need a terminal handy.
Yeah, exactly. You always need a terminal handy, and it's nice to have something that's persistent. That I get a little OCD about something always taking like a little space down in my tray or whatever. And so it's nice to just know it's always there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a one command away, like a boss. Boom. I hit that tilde key or whatever it is, and whatever you set it to, and it slides down. So that's Guake and Yaki.
Is it semi-transparent or is it opaque?
It can be whatever you want. I think the default was semi.
It could be your boss key as well to hide whatever you were doing.
Yeah, it could if you brought it down all the way, right?
Comes around.
Here's a screenshot where it's totally opaque and you can't see through it. So you could set that, and then I love that.
You're doing whatever you're doing, and then boss comes around, yoink.
Good thinking, Alan. I like the way you work. Chat room is mentioning that some people in there have noticed it's in the Linux Mint repo. It's also in the Arch repo. So there you go. Yeah. I found my favorite combo was Alt / because what desktop did I use? There was some desktop operating system I used for the longest time where I set GNOME do. So it must have been maybe it was my Mint install where GNOME do was my Alt / and now that I have that now that that's sort of worked in like a muscle memory, oh man, you can just kick that off so fast. Boom, boom, you're in, you're out. And it's nice, even for like a real quick ping test, like you're in your browser and the site's loading slow. Boom, bring it down, ping the website real quick, see what my response times are, slide it back up. You know,
Yep.
it's just, and you can set it to take focus or not take focus when it slides down. So I like that. All right, Alan. Well, that's enough picks and stuff like that. Let's do the news. All right, Alan.
Yes.
Wait, hold on. I knocked out my headphones when I did that. Hopefully I didn't show off my pajamas, because I am wearing pajamas. It is early in the morning.
Yes.
I can't show them on camera, though, because they're green and they would look like I'm naked. So that's the downside of a green screen.
Would they look like you're naked, or would it look like you have no legs?
Oh, that's probably more what it would look like. Yeah. I just like to fantasize that I'm not wearing pants when I do shows, Helen. So don't take that from me. All right, our top story is a fun one because it's celebrating a geek icon, someone who we mentioned a couple episodes ago who had passed away. Dennis Ritchie has now gotten an internet official holiday named after him, hasn't he, Alan?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Yes. Tim O'Reilly has declared October 30th to be Dennis Ritchie Day. This was after the governor of California declared October 16th to be Steve Jobs Day.
Oh, okay.
And, so Tim O'Reilly's like, I may not be a governor, but Dennis Ritchie was more important.
Yeah, and I like that Tim O'Reilly says, look, a lot of what we've done at O'Reilly wouldn't have been possible without Dennis.
Yeah, the entire O'Reilly wouldn't have happened. Apple wouldn't have happened. Nothing. Like, even if the internet still got invented somehow, it wouldn't be anything like it is if it wasn't for C and Unix. Because, pretty much every operating system that's built nowadays is built in C, right? And, even all the internet apps, right? Like the implementations of the TCP/IP stack and like FTP servers and all the basic infrastructure of the internet, even firmware on routers and stuff is all written in C.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't for high-level programming languages like that and Unix, the idea of a portable operating system you can run on any hardware, we wouldn't be where we are today.
And he had a crucial role in the development of Unix, and of course, just C alone is absolutely important. I don't know why they picked the 30th. I didn't glean that from the story, but I did glean that O'Reilly kind of got the idea from a discussion thread on frickin' Google+.
Yep.
Which is like, wow. And I think it's fun. I think, we don't need some governor to declare what official holidays are going to be. The internet, if the internet has a legend in its midst that passes, then I think the internet can declare a holiday for Dennis Ritchie, and I like it. So the Linux Action Show this is being recorded on October 30th, and we're celebrating Dennis Ritchie Day. So my coffee goes to you, Dennis. All right, Alan. The next story on the news docket is pretty interesting. It's interesting to see the way things are coming together, and it all revolves around what I realized is the new platform for server operating systems. It was in the past, what deals could a Linux vendor make with a hardware OEM? Could Red Hat get bundled with Dell? Could SUSE Enterprise Linux get bundled with HP hardware? What exclusive deals could they strike? You don't really hear those announcements so much anymore because I guess that territory has been paved. But what you do hear a lot about now is cloud computing. And you're seeing these different cloud computing initiatives becoming these new platforms that vendors are trying to secure deals with. OpenStack has been brought up a lot on the show already, and now we have an update to the OpenStack story that's unfolding, and that is that Canonical... Oh, wait, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Wait, hold on, where is it? Here it is. Canonical with Ubuntu, and now OpenSUSE are throwing in behind OpenStack. OpenSUSE is now also becoming a certified OpenStack operating system, right? Am I getting that terminology right, Alan, do you think?
I think so.
This is a really big deal for OpenSUSE, and I know that they're projecting that could be a huge thing for sales for them. And I had the advantage of seeing some of their communiques about this, and I realized after reading that to them, this is just as important as striking any deal with being preloaded with any hardware vendor out there. And it's awesome. It's exciting to see that SUSE isn't being left behind. It does feel a little bit like SUSE might be following in the examples of Canonical and things like that. Because here's an interesting note in this story. It says some of the very early OpenStack founding team came to Rackspace straight from Canonical.
Yep.
So some of the original people behind OpenStack defected from Canonical, joined Rackspace, got Rackspace's OpenStack initiative to be totally like Ubuntu friendly.
Well, I think that mostly just had to do with that's what they had experience with, and it was just the easiest distro to grab and make it run on the cloud.
but it is an absolute stroke of fantastic luck for Canonical. I mean, at first it would seem like people leaving you to go to another company like that would be like, a loss of resources that would be bad. But really, when you think about it, because that happened, Canonical got like a foot in on OpenStack ahead of the other guys.
Yeah, and it's interesting because mostly what you're running on OpenStack would be a server, and so Ubuntu doesn't always seem like the first choice for that.
Right, that's the other interesting part.
The Ubuntu server is something that's a little more mainstream and easy, and I think that was something they were going for with the cloud, especially Rackspace. They focus a lot on the people that can't do everything themselves, right? Where they need it's worth it to them to pay the extra price of Rackspace to get their fanatical support. And so by choosing an easier server operating system rather than defaulting to something, like Debian or something that's a little more, I don't know,
more manual
or professional,
more manual to set up, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, what the other clear thing that I'm seeing here is now you've got Ubuntu, you've got OpenSUSE, plus, you could probably just roll your own for OpenStack, but what you don't have in the mix is Red Hat. Red Hat's off doing their own thing, their OpenStack-like initiative that's supposed to be like a cloud in a box that people can just buy and pay Red Hat for. And it's kind of echoing, to an extent, a bit of a closed approach in a way, because it's like, we're offering this end-to-end solution from Red Hat that you can buy. But if you want to go where you can sort of mix and match the pieces and just use OpenStack as like this layer, you can't use Red Hat. You have to use either Ubuntu now or OpenSUSE. And this is the next big platform.
I don't know that you can't. Like, it's just Zen-based virtualization, so I don't know that it makes.
Yeah, I know. I think you could technically, but I think there's supported platforms, and then there's roll your own.
Well, because but that's always been Red Hat's thing, right? Is that they're providing this corporate solution.
They provide the support directly.
Right. And so with OpenStack, the support would be, they don't really have that. It's like, if you want support, you buy Rackspace Cloud Servers, which is the more advanced implementation of OpenStack that comes with the Rackspace support.
Right.
Right. Whereas OpenStack is for everybody else to build their own infrastructure.
Let's talk about...
The main thing there, though, is just to avoid vendor lock-in, right? OpenStack, if it's the common thing between Rackspace and like a whole bunch of other providers now,
that's the thing.
That it just means you can just move your cloud server between these companies without any problems. Whereas when you do something like maybe the Red Hat one or something like the Amazon one,
that's where it feels a little more lock-in. That's what I'm saying.
You're locked in. Like, if you build it for the Amazon platform, you can't just pick it up and move it to somewhere.
But isn't it just weird to have Red Hat kind of be the one that locks you in a little bit? I guess it's not weird, but
really, they're enterprise focused.
Yeah.
It's a different thought
game.
process.
It's a different approach.
Yeah, a different approach than you would get with your regular open source approach.
Yeah, I follow you. It does just, for me at first, was a bit of a mind shift to see different underdogs coming together to form the open approach, and to see the big dog. It just always seems like the big dog.
OpenStack has so much behind it with like companies like Dell and HP and But they also have a mix of different types of companies, right? Because then they have Rackspace as the original sponsor, but also there's other providers that would compete with Rackspace, like Pure One, who are also backing the OpenStack project.
Right. All right. Well, we'll move on, because I know people that really want to hear all about this server stuff will tune into TechSnap. We won't weigh it down too much, but I thought that was an interesting story to lead with, because the next story talks about how Canonical and Red Hat are actually working together in conjunction with the Linux Foundation. And this is, they're trying to tackle that whole secure UEFI, or, whatever it is.
UEFI or whatever it's called.
UEFI, yeah. The new standard and specifications being pushed forward with the introduction of Windows 8. And in fact, some vendors are already shipping it, like HP on their hardware. Now,
and, there was quite a bit of FUD going on about, this means you won't be able to run Linux on hardware anymore, and
it would be
technically,
like that. I think the issue is it would be technically possible using a signed key infrastructure to sign only certain bootloaders. And so the Linux Foundation released a white paper along with Ubuntu and Red Hat, and it was written by the technical advisory board members, one of them being James Bottomley, and he was interviewed by TechCrunch, and he went on to say that there is solutions that hardware vendors could use to deploy this new UEFI, and still allow users to install the operating systems they want. In fact, there could even be an approach they could use where users could sign their Linux installation themselves. So that way they could actually take advantage of having a secured boot environment, and if they were allowed to manage it themselves. And there's different modes that these hardware vendors can ship the machines in, either in setup mode or lockdown or open mode. And so they're trying to approach it from here's a technical white paper on how we feel you should approach. And they're not off base with this, I feel.
No.
So,
and at some point it would be less optimal, but if they just like Grub isn't really modified between all the different Linux boot systems, right?
Yeah.
So if you just get it signed every once in a while and use it.
Had like a universal Grub that was maybe I don't think that's likely to
That'd
happen.
be suboptimal, but
I think and also licensing incompatibilities with the GPL and things like that would probably prevent that. But
it's just being signed, right? So it's not the code isn't being changed in any way.
I don't know. I guess
it's just a digital signature.
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, maybe that wouldn't be incompatible. I don't know.
I think
somebody out there might know. Leave us a comment, because I think I had heard that it would be, but I don't understand technically why.
Because it would be the compiled version you'd be distributing. But as long as you give us away the source code as well, then it's not a...
So I think, but I had heard it was, so if anybody knows, maybe leave us a comment. But I just thought it was an interesting story to cover, talking about how Red Hat was kind of off on an island with its own on the OpenStack stuff, but also working with the rest of the team players in this particular instance. So it says here that the that's what it is. The Reaper924 in the chat room says the GPL3 requires you give away the private key. I didn't know that, but I'm not very familiar with GPL3 beyond the basics. So now,
someday I'll do a nice rant about the GPL3.
Oh, really? Okay, all right. I'm sure there's people that will be very interested and very uninterested in hearing that.
Exactly.
Brian did one of those a while ago, and it stirred up quite a bit of controversy. So I've steered clear of it. But
At least
I know there's
people are listening.
Let people. Reminds people they're listening. Jolicloud. The Jolicloud OS was reviewed. About 5-6 months ago on the Linux Action Show, and it was a good little netbook OS. Had sort of like some Chromebook inspirations, and was reaching to be like this one OS you'd load on all these netbook type devices to rule them all. But I guess with the popularity of tablets and the decline of netbooks, Jolicloud and Jolly OS has decided to refocus. They're gonna drop the whole distro thing. I'm not kidding you here. They're dropping the whole Linux distro thing. Jolicloud is, and they're going to like a cloud service aggregator, I think is what you might call it. They're going to pull in like Dropbox and Google and Facebook all into one service. I don't really.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're going to just pull it all in or just sync between them. So when you put something,
I don't know.
It shows up somewhere else.
They have a demo on their site where they show like Flickr and Twitter and Dropbox and iCloud and Facebook and Google Plus all brought into their system. That's what kind of made me think aggregator.
Okay.
Like RSS feeds almost for all your stuff in one really fancy viewer.
OPML, which is a feed of RSS feeds.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. I would maybe, but it's a pretty major departure, dropping the entire operating system.
Right. Well, if it wasn't going anywhere, then
yeah. No, you're right. It's just a pretty big pivot. It was actually a pretty nice little netbook OS. But who the f wants netbooks?
I love my netbook.
I know. I like mine too. But I've had no compelling reason to upgrade my MSI Win that I think I got 2 years ago.
Well, yeah. Like my netbook, I have a EEE 1000 HE. Yeah. There's no reason to upgrade it. Like I only use it for stuff that isn't CPU intensive.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
I could stick a little bit more RAM in it maybe, but it has
and when you have a keyboard and you have a mouse, don't you want a full desktop operating system?
I mostly use mine for like when I'm at the data center and I just need something to be able to, I have a USB serial port and I can jack into a server and work on it.
So would you run a more limited OS? Would you run something that was more Chrome OS-ish?
Not really.
That's my thing.
Like I have the hard drive has Windows on it, and the flash drive, the SD card has BSD on it.
Yeah, if I wanted a watered down desktop on my netbook, why would I have a netbook? Why wouldn't I just get a tablet?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so if I was going to buy now, I might consider something like that, the Asus Transformer, which is like a tablet. It turns into a netbook.
It's got the keyboard dock.
Yeah, and basically it turns it into a netbook, and that That is quite compelling.
Oh! Trust me,
Well,
if I
obviously, that
had
didn't
any spare
exist
cash
back-
right now, I'd have one of those suckers.
Right.
I want that. And
I'm not quite as big a gadget guy as you. I don't really own a lot of different devices.
well, and now I kind of want to wait for ice cream sandwich.
Right.
Speaking of ice cream sandwich, let's talk about the fact that Nexus One owners out there are kind of going to get the old bone from Grandpa Google. I'm calling him Grandpa Google now because he's moving slow and not getting the job done anymore. Grandpa Google has declared publicly now that the Nexus One won't be receiving ice cream sandwich, and I wasn't actually really going to cover this until it became a pretty lengthy discussion on Google Plus. I started 2 different threads and got just a ton of replies from people with extremely well thought out, very, very intelligent, insightful comments. So I want to thank everybody who's following me on Google Plus. And thank you very much for your awesome dialogue that we had on Google Plus about this issue. What I came down on Google is the following, Alan. The reason why I think it's kind of bupkis that the Nexus One isn't getting ice cream sandwich is it was the original Google phone, the Google phone, the premier. Like, if we could build a phone any way we wanted, this is what it would be. And it was only released 21 months ago, which means people who bought it are still in their carrier contract. And if you recall, it was only available for T-Mobile for a very short while, or outside of contract, which was like $530, $600 after you got the car charger and shipped it. So people who spent $600 on the Google phone or are still in their original contract, so i.e. Google's most loyal and passionate, dedicated customers, aren't getting an ice cream sandwich.
All right.
I think it's crap. I think it's total crap.
Well,
and in comparison, the iPhone 3GS, which, I mean, come on, it is the iPhone 3GS. It came out 6 months before the Nexus One, and it just got iOS 5. And it would probably run like total crap, but the reality is you have the option as a user to upgrade if you want to. And I'm just wondering, what is it about Google's just leaving users behind like this that we don't get on their case for it?
It depends. Well, first of all, by the time Ice Cream Sandwich comes out, the Nexus One will be, as near as makes no difference, 2 years old. Does it meet the system requirements to run Ice Cream Sandwich?
Oh, I'm sure it doesn't. In fact, I think, well, it's, I'm very confident that the modding community, like the Cyanogen folks, will make it work. I believe it came down possibly to a storage limitation on the Nexus One.
Well, if it won't fit, it won't fit.
That's such crap, though. That is such crap. First of all,
right, but if the experience would be worse than sticking with the older version, then I see why Google wouldn't want to force people to upgrade. Or
can you believe?
To offer them
do you think it's a realistic excuse that in 21 months the operating system advanced so far that with all of Google's money and all of Google's staff and all of Google's resources and a massive Android open source community, that they couldn't figure out a way to make their latest operating system run on their premier Nexus One device, the first Google phone that was still under contract?
Premier device. It's not the premier.
Well,
Nexus
it was
device.
though.
It's the original one. It's the beta, and it's the early adopter version. And
yeah, that's true.
You kind of
there is that
there was going to be this issue if you bought the very first one.
I just think.
Now, I'm
when
sure,
people
like you
look
said,
at what Google does,
the mod community will make a way for it to happen.
Yeah.
It's just Google doesn't want to offer the update because people will install it and then people will hate their Android from then on because it will run like crap.
That's a fair point. It just, if Google isn't ready to play with the big boys, then maybe Google needs to get their crap together first. I think what
first phone, it was,
No, I agree. But here, this
chart in the water and see what the water's like.
This chart isn't great, but I will give you. Here it is. This chart we're showing. I'll try to link. I'll put a link to my Google Plus post in the profiles in the show notes so you guys can see this. This chart is a list of the operating system updates that different Android phones have gotten. There is not an Android phone on the market that has received as many updates as any iOS device. None of them. No Android phone has gotten the treatment that any iOS device has, and it's crap. I think what it plays back on for me is if we didn't have the Cyanogen community and all of the modders out there, Android users would be significantly more screwed. Google does not take care of the users, and I'm trying to figure out why that is. And then I realized Google just doesn't give a crap. It's the hardware OEMs that have to care. we're waiting for a hardware OEM to make this amazing Google phone that will come up and say, you know what, we'll update it for 3 years. Or we will try our best to get every OS on that phone. Because Google's just not going to do it.
Right, but I think the main difference here is that Android came out in a much less polished state, right? It was basically in beta for a while, like all Google things that have ever happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, if the risk of using a beta anything is that, there's not necessarily going to be an upgrade path.
Yeah, and there's not always the incentives. Like the chat room's pointing out, the carriers prefer you to buy a new phone than get an upgrade. So it's a challenge for Android. I think what would alleviate my concerns is if Google would just come out and say, here's our stake in the ground. This platform is software will be compatible with this.
Is a roadmap.
Yes,
showing,
a roadmap.
Here's the versions, here's the phones.
Here's the ones you can count on for staying compatible for a while.
Now, if you didn't buy the phone directly from Google, right, if you got a sampler or anything, then it's not Google's problem to decide, which hardware is going to run what versions and so on.
I think it's funny, too, because, my Samsung Galaxy Tab is less than a year old and is just stuck on Android 2.2. No updates. I got one update after I bought it, and they're done with it. And
right, and that would be the hardware manufacturer.
Yes.
Has nothing to do with Google.
And it's just, for me, it's a frustrating thing. And what I would love to see is the ecosystem open up so there's more universal hardware, and that the Cyanogen people and people like them just became community members that produced software for open platforms. Yep. And I want to get away from these carriers because it's not in Samsung's best interest. It's not in HTC's best interest to do this. So we've got to get somebody. It's not even apparently in Google's best interest. See, I guess what I hoped, Alan, and why I'm frustrated is I had hoped with the Nexus One and the Nexus S that this was Google saying, these other guys, they're not bringing you guys along, but with these Nexus phones, you're getting that. This is Google supporting these phones, and you're going to get the updates. Maybe 21, 22 months is long enough to abandon a phone. In my opinion, it feels like for a $600 device, that's too soon.
Probably.
Especially after contract, it's probably $1,200 if you factor in that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless.
And I would be just as angry if they did that to my Nexus S, which I just bought a couple months ago.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can it
is the downside of a new platform.
Yeah, and we don't have a link to it in the show notes here, but I was reading recently that to compile Ice Cream Sandwich, you need at least 16 gigabytes of RAM and like 32 gigabytes of free disk space. It is
32 gigs?
Yeah, but basically you need 16 gigabytes of RAM in order to compile it.
Wow,
that's something a lot of people don't have on their dev machine.
That's a lot of memory.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
so apparently it's quite like it compiles down so it can run on the Android device, but I can understand why some of it might actually have issues with trying to run on really old hardware with not a lot of RAM and not a lot of storage space.
Okay, that's interesting. That doesn't sound very efficient. All right. Well, obviously I'm pretty fired up about this issue. So leave comments, leave thoughts wherever you're watching this or listening to this. Let us know what you think. And I think the last thing I'll mention is the other reason why I'm a little bit riled up about it is with the failure of Migo and Memo and those things. We don't have an open source community driven platform for this new wave of hardware. Yep. And I'm a little freaked out because that makes us very, very dependent on Google and on Android. And Android does run on top of Linux, and I don't want to see something that's powered by Linux distorted, perverted, Yeah, I know it's not Linux, but it runs on top of Linux. Right. I just hate to see Linux used for crap.
Yeah, it's just you don't want to see that being the only Linux option is this one that's not actually Linux.
But it is right now, and that's why it's even more critical to me. Yeah. All right, but enough with that. Let's talk about something that might be kind of interesting for future app development on the Linux desktop, and that is Skype's new API. Remember we mentioned this back in June, but there's a little update here now. They've released the Skype Kit, an update to it that gives you the ability as a software developer to write to Skype's video and audio APIs inside your own application. It is closed source, but it's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, which is great. And desktop developers, say this isn't likely to happen, but say Evolution had a closed source plugin bundle you could get, and one of them was built-in video conferencing right inside Evolution, powered by Skype. That'd be pretty compelling.
Right,
it's great to see them do it.
Did the native Linux Skype client have video?
Crappy video. Yeah.
'Cause-
I'm always surprised. I'm
Yeah.
surprised, because Skype likes to pretend for about 2 years at a time that Linux doesn't exist. And now they're owned by Microsoft. And that's actually official and done. And then after that was announced and done, we get the Skype kit for Linux.
But at the same time, after they released the Skype kit, they started doing DMCA takedown notices on any open source project that was sending like a way to send Skype messages without having the Skype client.
Like the Skype chats. So you could do like integrated Skype chat, and I know.
Yeah,
I know.
So they released a nice API that is
then
closed source,
Yeah.
and then they go after any form of reverse engineering. Now, the problem here is actually the law that allows them to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
True that.
DMCA,
Yeah.
reverse engineering should never be illegal. It's an important part of
Amen.
research
Humanity
of
figuring out
anything.
how things work. So that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are.
Yes, it's like all scientific discovery started by reverse engineering nature.
Mm-hmm.
How does gravity work? How does physics work?
That's what I mean. Yeah, exactly.
So it's bad laws.
That makes me think, Alan, with all of that said, I think it's time we go reverse engineer a Linux distribution. So we're going to, in our next segment, we're going to jump over and review the Arch Made Easy distro Chakra. But before we do that, I want to mention our Linux Action Show subreddit at linuxactionshow.reddit.com. I love this place. This is like my zen place of happiness where everybody loves open source and Linux and love to talk about the same things. Look at some of our top stories just submitted 3 hours ago by Bayer5598. HP refutes rumors of WebOS shutdown. And then right after that, there's the Jolicloud story that we just covered. Boom, look at this. And then in the third story, an open source Minecraft clone. And what's great is you can go in here and you can filter just by like the top stories. So like if you only get a chance to go in here every now and then, you can just see what people are talking about the most. And you'll notice, perfect for this episode, the upvote symbol is an Arch logo and the downvote symbol is a Windows logo. How awesome is that? And when you click it, they light up. So obviously we've got some Arch fans, so I think they're going to love this episode. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the news for this week. All right, Alan, let's review Chakra. Right? I get it?
Yes.
Yeah? I got it? Nice.
Finally.
This distro came across my radar when I was setting out to find an easy way to do Arch Linux. Now, some of you might not realize that almost a year ago today, I'm trying to find the actual date here. I'm bringing it up. Almost a year ago today, we did the Linux Action Show's first review of Arch Linux. And that was in Season 14, Episode 3.
And this is Season 19, Episode 3.
Yeah, so times have changed. Yeah, okay, here we go. So October 31st, 2010 was when we reviewed Arch Linux. So it felt like it was time to revisit. But one of the things we walked away with is the problem with Arch is it just takes a ton of time to get started. It just is a lot of work. So I thought, is there an easier way to get rolling with Arch that wouldn't really take anything away from Arch's overall niceties, like pacman and things like that? Well, that's how I found Chakra Linux. Right? And it's not exactly an Arch clone. It started as a pure Arch-based distro, and they've kind of gone down the path of diverging more and more. They have their own repos now, and they have their own things called bundles now, which we'll talk about in just a second. And it's diverging more. It still is, though. It's still, if you're familiar with things like pacman and you're familiar with the Arch layout, and it uses all of the Arch tools and things like that. So it's a great way to start playing and understanding Arch and learning how Arch works without having to do that install first. Now, that might seem a little backwards, but follow this review. Tell us what you think. And the other thing to remember is at the end of the review, if you like what we talked about, in the show notes, we'll have a link to the virtual machine that we'll be reviewing today that you can download yourself. It'll be a torrent of it.
Yep.
Now, maybe the bundles is a good place to start because it sort of really sets up what this distribution is about. It's their way to address an issue on a KDE desktop, and they've got a beautiful KDE desktop. In fact, I'll pull it up here for you video viewers here, and they want to be purist, I guess. Would you say that's the right word? They want to be Qt purists, where they don't want any GTK all over their system. So, like, if you want a GTK-based application, they've created this bundle system to allow you to download it's like a sparse ISO type image file, and you could download, say, Chrome, and it has everything that Chrome needs, all of its GTK dependencies and everything in this one sparse image file. And then they have this utility that installs it onto your system and lets you set as your default browser. And they offer the same thing for GIMP and things like that. Here, I'll pull it up.
Yep.
You can have this. It's a little bit of a rough tool, but one of the tools they ship on Chakra Linux is the bundle manager. And this bundle manager, it lets you go out and find all of these things that they've pre-bundled. Like, okay, here's a great example. They have the Firefox nightly build and they have Firefox 7, right?
Yep.
If I wanted Firefox 7, I would have to go out and get all of its GTK dependencies and things like that and install them on the system. But since they want you to have that Qt purist interface, they just have one button here that I click and it starts downloading Firefox. It'll install that image file, set up all of the appropriate menu shortcuts in Kicker, and then you're done. It seems a little bit like the PBI system.
Yeah, it basically has the dependencies self-contained so that they don't pollute your system. And I can understand now, if different apps require like different versions of GTK, then you can get into all kinds of trouble where you have to upgrade the versions of GTK and you don't want to break whatever else you have installed. But at the same time, it seems like if you install Firefox and Thunderbird, are you going to end up with 2 complete copies of the GTK library sitting on your hard drive for no reason?
I think you do. But they're not that big. But it does get weird and security updates.
It does remind me of the PBI system from PCBSD.
Yeah, it definitely does. It also includes... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the thing that I found weird is that I just started up the interface they have for the regular package manager.
Yes.
And it was weird and just, I don't know, not user-friendly that I couldn't find Firefox.
It's a little clunky.
Because it's a bundle. It's not a package.
Yeah, it's a little clunky.
With the PBI system and PCBSD, you can still use the regular package. It's just the PBI is self-contained and it's easier and it's with the PBI system, if you're not familiar with it, it works kind of like a .msi in Windows. But basically, if you're coming from Windows, it's the system you're used to, right? You go to this website, you download the Firefox PBI, you double-click on it, you get a little installer window, next, finished, and now you have Firefox.
They do have sort of a semi-web-based repo place where you can go find different packages and download them, and then it will install them.
They have this package thing, and it has things like I went and installed VLC from their package manager, and it worked great. It's just that's just a GUI front end to Pacman is what all that is. Exactly. Yeah. And it's just that Firefox wasn't in the list. And it was just like, well, that's weird.
Yeah. They don't use the Arch repos. So they have their own Pacman repos.
Yeah. And so basically Firefox only is available as a bundle, which is fine. It's just that wasn't obvious right away.
I agree. The other thing that I think is probably important to mention about Chakra Shaka Baka Bang Bang is that
2 syllables.
It has its own tools, and one of them is the Tribe installer that they've developed, and the Tribe installer is what makes loading Arch Linux on your machine such a painless process. It's a little funky because it is written from scratch by them, and I don't mean to disparage them when I say that, because it is a fantastic, great installer that looks slick, except for I was a little hung up when it came to the drive partitioning. For this virtual machine, the gotcha is, if you have a blank hard drive that's never, ever had a file system written to it, their partition manager won't let you create it'll let you, but it won't actually work to create a partition table on the drive. So you're never, unless there's already been a partition table once before, you can't partition using their installer. So when I installed it on my laptop, it was a total non-issue because I've installed a billion operating systems on there, and it just went on like a champ. And then when I went to go load this virtual machine for the last audience, I was completely hung up, and I just thought, what the? So
it just seems kind of weird that they've never installed it in a virtual machine before. It just seems like if you're testing your installer, that would be like where you spend 90% of your time.
Well, what they do is their installer is very basic for partitioning, and then if you need to do more advanced stuff, they kick you out to a KDE-based tool, and I think that tool was not working properly. And so because that tool wasn't doing its job...
because they're so anti-GTK, they're not just going to embed gparted into your...
So you know what I did is I rebooted off of the Mint CD, which the live CD has gparted already pre-installed, and I just gparted the drive and then rebooted back and installed. It was kind of one of those funny things where it threw me off for a little bit, and then I realized, blank drive.
But essentially, that little 2 megabyte gparted live CD is,
awesome.
It's one of the most used CDs at my house.
It's a lifesaver sometimes.
It is.
They also have a tool called Live Scripts, which will let you load up your own live CD and things like that and spin your own version of this, which is kind of cool. And the other thing I like about this project is it's got a great vibe. the name is based off like this Hindu, body energy system, but they're really kind of chill about it. They're progressing nice and steadily at a nice pace. They're very relaxed and very open with their community. They've got wiki pages up and tutorials on how to do things, and some decently active forums. I would just say my main worry would be that they're trying to differentiate, and they're doing a great job at doing it. But going too far from Arch, I think, is more of a detriment than it is a benefit. Because one of the things I've noticed is Linux users who've been around for a while often gravitate towards Arch and stay there and become very, very passionate. I've noticed in our audience, in the Linux Action Show audience, our viewers tend to start very Ubuntu heavy or very Fedora heavy, and there's often a course where I see them switching to Arch, and people get to Arch and they love it. In fact, if you go to our Reddit page, it's clear that Arch is the distribution of choice in the community there. And if you look at the chat room right now, they're all saying, I love Arch. Arch is great, except for a few people are saying Mint because they're my brethren. But so if Chakra Bang Bang goes too far from Arch, I think they could end up actually isolating themselves too much. And some of the reason I found them is I want just a nicer, easier to use Arch that has some extra stuff. That's where they're at now, but I sense they're drifting out.
Yeah, and if they go too far, then they run into the issue where it's harder to keep in line with the base, right? Like if they get too far away, they can't just import the latest version of Arch and rebuild on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because they've diverged too much.
So one of the other things that Chakra has is it has the pacman system, which, Alan, some people have written in and said they'd like to hear your thoughts on pacman versus ports, being a FreeBSD guy.
Yeah.
Are they analogous? Do you have any thoughts? What do you think?
Well, pacman itself isn't. Pacman is analogous to FreeBSD's package add, right? Because it's just taking a binary package file and installing it.
Right.
It's not, like, the format isn't compatible, but it's a similar idea. And then the analogy to the ports tree is the Arch build system, or ABS.
Okay.
And it's designed to mimic the capabilities of ports, but it's not exactly the same. It has a few shortcomings, and I just don't like the way it's organized. The categories and stuff just don't make as much sense as the BSD ones.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
It's not.
That's organization, but do you have any technical qualms or?
Well, I've written a whole little comparison here that we'll get into.
Oh, all right. You got which will be located in the show notes.
Of course.
Yes, of course. All right, we'll get into it, sir.
All right. So both ports and ABS consist of basically a number of directories named after the packages, right? So like if you want to install Firefox, there's a directory in there somewhere called Firefox.
Sure.
Or Apache or whatever. And they're sorted into categories. For example, under ports, Apache is under www because it's a web service, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like www Apache 2 or Apache 2.2, depending if you want 2.0 or 2.2. And that's another difference we'll get to in a second. Under ABS, Apache is kind of in an odd place. It's under extra, then under daemons, and then Apache.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you're browsing through them, maybe you could figure that out, but
there's probably some tribal nomenclature knowledge you need to have there.
Right, but it's just, basically they break when their packages down into, core versus extra versus whatever.
Yeah.
And that mostly comes from the fact that they have separate repositories. And that's basically a difference between every Linux package manager and BSD. Is in BSD there are no repositories. There's just the one singular ports tree.
Right.
And it contains 20,000 different applications. And they're sorted into categories and they're good to go. And it's just part of that is because stock FreeBSD, when you install it, doesn't come with any packages.
Right.
And that's a big difference compared to Linux, right?
Now Arch, the stock Arch comes very, very minimal, much more like FreeBSD.
Yeah,
but not.
But it does have some packages, right?
Yeah.
As this core set.
Yeah.
And that's just a philosophy thing. Part of it is you have to remember that FreeBSD has been around for a very long time. It was based on the original BSDs before it. And so it's just what was base system and what was a package is completely separate.
That makes sense.
But anyway, those directories don't actually contain the source code or files for Firefox or Apache. They just contain a couple of scripts that provide the infrastructure to build Firefox.
Okay.
So basically, you go into that directory and you do a couple of commands. They're different between ports and ABS, but those commands then go through the process of building the application for you.
Right.
And so the first thing it does is it goes out and downloads the source code from the mirrors. So you don't have to go and know where Firefox is. When you go to the Firefox directory and run the command, it goes out and downloads Firefox for you. Then it, I think it does under ABS, but it does for sure under ports, is it checksums that file to make sure that it wasn't corrupted during the download and that the mirror wasn't hacked or anything like that.
Right.
And those checksums are distributed as part of the ports tree. So that is basically as opposed to package signing, because the ports tree is mostly grabbing, Firefox from the official Mozilla mirror. So the Mozilla mirror is not going to contain a copy signed with a FreeBSD key, right? And so it just uses a checksum that's distributed as part of the ports tree. And that's how it provides the file security.
Okay.
Because, right, like we've talked about on TechSnap before, how just checking the SHA sum of a file against the one on the website isn't necessarily safe, because if it's the website you downloaded it from, then if they hack the file, they can just replace the checksum on the file.
Yeah.
But this way, you're getting it out of band from a different source. And when you update your ports tree, that is signed by the FreeBSD security officer's key. Anyway, after it checksums the file, it then extracts the tar file, like you would normally expect, and applies any patches if they're required.
Sure.
FreeBSD sometimes requires a couple little changes to get something to compile, but also they change all the default paths and everything. FreeBSD has a very specific directory structure. Basically, anything that's not part of the core system when it gets installed goes under user local.
Right.
Right. So that it's completely separated from what's part of the OS and what's a package.
There's even like a user local Etsy directory for configs, and like everything is contained.
Every package's config files are under user local etc rather than the root etc. It keeps them entirely separate, which has a number of advantages and just makes things cleaner and more organized. But maybe it annoys you.
It threw me off. I tell you what.
Yeah.
I've never fully adapted to that. Yeah. It was a constant source of confusion.
Yeah. But it can actually make sense.
I see the logic in it, yeah.
Yeah. And then the next thing it does is run the configure script for the application, right? So Firefox or VLC or whatever you're installing has a configure script. Now under BSD, you'll get a text menu that'll let you choose some of the options. For example, when you're compiling VLC, you can choose whether you want to have support for, I forget what the library is called, but there's one that allows you to play movies as ASCII files.
Okay.
If you want to do that for whatever reason, if you like to watch movies in your terminal. And so it lets you choose all the configure options you might want. And then it compiles the application. Right. It does the process of actually building it.
Sounds very Gentoo.
Including solving the dependencies.
That sounds very Gentoo. That sounds exactly like the Gentoo system.
Right. So it solves, there's two kind of dependencies. There's build dependencies. So that's something that has to be installed before you can compile the app. And then there's run dependencies, which are just things that have to be installed before you can run the app.
Right, okay. Interesting to split them up like that.
Yeah, and then it compiles the application. Well, because one is, a build dependency means you need the source code for it, or the header files. And a run dependency means you just need the shared library.
Right, of course. So that makes sense.
So then it compiles the application. And then only under BSD, not under Arch, the ports tree can actually install the application. Under Arch, after you compile it, you build a package, and then you would manually install that package with pacman.
Oh, really? So
it's just a build system for building the packages.
I guess that makes sense, because then it can maintain it like a package.
Right. Now, under BSD, the ports tree is what's used to make all the packages on the official mirror.
Oh, they're saying you can do make package-i to install it.
Right.
So it'll install it after it's done.
But
making the package, though.
You have to actually make the package first and then install it. Under BSD, you can skip that step and just install it directly from what you've compiled.
I see.
Or you can make a package. Actually, to make a package, it actually does the install, grabs the files, makes the package, and then uninstalls it. But that's to make sure that all the scripts fire off properly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that way you know it installs. That makes sense.
Yeah. So basically, but as part of the install, the other thing the BSD package system does is it checksums all the files that were installed, including the config files.
The actual installed files.
Yeah. So like when you install Samba, it installs a default smb.conf, right? And it checksums that file. And then something the BSD ports tree has is the ability to uninstall an application, right? Pacman has this, but the build system doesn't because the build system is separate. When you uninstall an application with the BSD package manager, what it does is it goes through that list of checksums that installed, and if the file's the same, so if the smb.conf hasn't been modified from the default, it gets removed as part of the uninstall. If the file
has changed, by the admin or
if
whatever.
you made changes to it, then it doesn't remove it.
I like that.
And then, so the upgrade process is literally just uninstall Samba, upgrade your ports tree, and install the newer Samba.
Right.
And then the newer Samba, when it goes to install, it says, hey, there's an smb.conf there already. I'm not going to overwrite that. But it will overwrite the smb.conf.dist or whatever, the example. Right? So there's always 2 copies there. And so there's a whole system to make sure that you can upgrade in place without losing your config. But if you didn't change the files, you don't end up with a bunch of abandoned files after a package is uninstalled.
Right.
So yeah, so they're quite similar. It's just the ports tree isn't used just as a build infrastructure, but it's actually a package manager in itself.
Okay. So it's a little bit of it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. And the ABS is just the build system. But basically, ports is used the same way in the backend at FreeBSD. There's a cluster of servers called Pointy Hat that just basically takes the ports tree and compiles every single port every day. Right? Just in an endless loop. And then those are what they use as the packages that go on the CDs or in the FTP archives.
I see. One of the things that sounds kind of compelling to me about Arch and Pacman in particular, and this is why I'm wondering if Chakra Linux won't be a great direction to go, is the IRC is lit up with this tool called Yaourt, and it stands for Yet Another User Repository Tool that lets you add it's a community authored wrapper for Pacman, which lets you access like community repos and other things like that. And it seems like this is really one of the strongest aspects to Arch, and that is where maybe Chakra is kind of as a disservice, is if it's not taking advantage of some of this stuff, it might be limited in what people out there want to use it for. But the flip side is if you want to experiment with Arch and learn the way the file system's laid out, learn the way the tools work, use KD in the process, and just have something that works out of the box, this is a great option for that. So it's a compelling distribution for that reason. And I'm going to do a little experiment and run it for the next week and see if I can continue to use it or if I start hitting limitations.
Right. But again, that comes back to this idea of having all these separate repositories, which, while they serve a purpose, I find them annoying. Under the BSD port system, one of the differences is that there'll be multiple versions of a package. For example, Apache, there are, I think, 10 different Apaches in the ports tree. Right? There's like Apache 1.3, 2.0, 2.2, and then there's like ones with different patches and feature sets. Or like, for example, right now in the ports tree, there's PHP 5.2 or 5.3. And then you can just choose which one you want and install it. Whereas most package systems, like the repositories, one repository it'll just be called PHP and it'll be 5.3. But there'll be some testing repository that has 5.4 beta or whatever.
The thing I like about the multiple repositories is it lets you kind of categorize and divvy things up, so you can say like, well, the stuff in this repository is maybe it's a little bit on the fresher side of code, so it might be a little unstable, or it's got some community patches to it, so you know that you stay clear of all that kind of stuff unless you specifically add that repo. And it's
right. And BSD has that in just a naming convention. The unstable version of like FFmpeg would be called ffmpeg-dev, and that'll be like an SVN snapshot. And so obviously you don't want to run that if you want a stable version. You run the regular ffmpeg. But if you want the unstable version, it's there.
So Soul Knife in the chat room is pointing out, and this almost might be the best of both worlds, and this is not an area I experimented with this distro, is you can use, Chakra lets you take packages from the Arch repository and then move them over, and they become like a community package for Chakra. So that could be kind of I don't know, something to play with at least. It's a compelling distribution. There's a lot of things I like about it. I was hoping maybe to see like Btrfs support too. Extended 4 was the latest Linux file system that I could format, and that's fine. Totally does the job. Works.
Butter's not really production ready yet anyway, right?
But see, the other guys are doing it. SUSE, Ubuntu, and Red Hat all offer it. Wouldn't mind just to play with it. You'd think on Arch you'd get to. It's got the latest kernel. It's got like 3.02, and it's got KDE 4.
Well, yeah, if it's got the latest kernel, why wouldn't it have it?
It's got like all the latest stuff. Maybe it's just not exposed in the UI. Actually, it could be
Maybe
it could be on the command line.
Yeah, just the installer doesn't support it because they don't want people to choose it, thinking, "Hey, this will be cool," and then it's like, "Oh, it ruined my system."
Arch itself, the Ringmaster points out that Arch itself is supporting Btrfs in its install. So,
Right.
if I wanted to, I'm sure I could just bust down to the command line and do it. It didn't matter that to me that much. I was just kind of surprised to see it's not there. I would never run it on a production server yet myself, so it's not really a big deal. But interesting. Alan, any other thoughts on this bad boy?
Not so much.
All right. Well, just a reminder, you can go grab the virtual image of this if you want to play with it. We have a torrent linked in our show notes, hosted by Alan's nice, speedy servers. Thank you, sir.
No, yes.
And I think I would be curious to know if anyone out there has been using this for a while, because it just showed up on my radar. And I sometimes I feel like this stuff slips in there, and you get so heads down on one thing, and I'm always like looking at the big distros to review that I always try to pull back and find this stuff. Like Archbang. Archbang is another great example of a distro that sort of accomplishes what we've talked about today, and it's at archbang.org. If there's another distro out there like the fancy Archbang or like Chakra, let me know. I'm really trying to wrap my brain around Arch because I've noticed so much passion for it in the Linux Action Show community. So if you've got a go-to distro based on Arch, like Archbang or Chakra, or majorlinux.org, Rikai mentions, let me know in the show note commentary. I'd love to cover that in a future feedback episode. All right, everyone. Well, that's the Linux Action Show's look at Chakra Linux.
Chakra.
And that brings us to the end of this week's epic broadcast. Alan, thanks for joining me another week.
Yes, no problem.
And I'm rocking my Jupiter Broadcasting hoodie. If you'd like to get a Jupiter Broadcasting hoodie, I'll try to put a link in the show notes. I'll try to remember to do that because it is warm. It's getting cold out here in the studio, so I thought I'm going to go out and get warm today. Also, if you're an advertiser with an awesome product and you want to reach some of the smartest, most engaged people on the internet, contact me. Or actually, check out our advertising page. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/advertise, and I'd love for you to contact us so we can feature your rockstar product right here on the big show. I'm going, next week is my last week contracting. And then after that, I'm a free man, and I'm taking a shot at doing this full time. Which also means JupiterBroadcasting.com/donate is a great place to go as well, because I'm a little freaked out, but it'll all work out. And one last bit of business before we go is go check out SciByte. It is our new science news show. We've reformatted and relaunched, and it stars myself and Heather, our local scientist, and I am just so proud of the way this show has turned out, and we just released episode 18. It comes out every Wednesday morning over on the jupiterbroadcasting.com, and I really say I encourage you to check it out. I think you'll be pleasantly impressed. Alan, any other business before we head out of here?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, just a reminder, there's a couple of different ways to interact with the show. You can go to linuxactionshow.reddit.com to submit a question or a story or just a vote, whatever you'd like to do. You can also email the show, linuxactionshow@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And Alan, let's see, you're twitter.com/AlanJude.
Yep.
You're also on the Google+. Do you have one way or the other you prefer people to get a hold of you?
Not really. Google Plus I tend to use more.
Okay. And we have links to both Alan's Google Plus profile as well as my Google Plus profile in the show notes. And I'm twitter.com/ChrisLAS. I'm also preferring Google Plus these days. I like the threaded conversation about it. And,
right. It makes it easier to track a conversation with multiple people.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I had nearly 100 combined comments on the Linux, on the Nexus One.
Ice cream sandwich thing.
Yeah, on the ice cream sandwich thing. And Twitter, that would never happen. It's just impossible. And but it also lets other people read it. So it's like it's email where you can have a threaded conversation, but it's public so other people can jump in. I like it a lot. So yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. We'll be back right here live Sunday morning, then for release later Sunday evening over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Go check out one of those RSS feeds, grab the show weekly, and we'll see you right back here next week.